Want to know what the movers and shakers of New Hampshire's performing arts are thinking? Welcome to New Hampshire Unscripted with your host, Ray Dudley.
This is Ray Dudley, Artistic Director for Square Peg Productions. And in this episode, I sit down with my good friend, Andrew Pinard. Andrew is a magician as well as being the owner of the Hatbox Theatre in Concord. In this episode, I bring up the question of what is the difference between a magician and an illusionist. Andrew also talks about being the editor of Magic History Journal. He tells the story of a magician who has no hands or feet. He then tells the story of a magician who can produce a block of ice from under a hat given to him by a guest. We talk about his relationship with Harry Anderson in the Three Shell Game. And then we talk about the man who fooled Houdini. And lastly, we talk about what a great success the Hatbox Theatre has been to the performing arts community in New Hampshire. Mr. Andrew Pinard, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ray. Great to be here.
I wanted to talk magic today, and then maybe we'll get into a little bit about the Hatbox. But I thought I'm really enamored with what you do in that whole field of magic. Speaking of magic, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Magic. So on my way in, I was wondering about, is there a difference between a magician and an illusionist, or are those synonymous titles?
There's probably a big contingency of people who think that they're substantially different. The basic distinction is that illusionists push boxes around, and magicians don't have to do that. It's really a matter of scale. You know, an illusionist, if you think about it, it really pertains to either optical illusions or perceptual illusions. But frankly, life is an illusion in some ways. So, you know, I don't really draw a distinction. I don't really consider myself a magician. I'm a performer who happens to use magic as a vehicle. So, yeah, because I can't do magic. I mean, really, all I can do is help you see what magic might look like if it were real.
Okay, so that's interesting perspective. And you say that in your shows, too. You make a very clear distinction about, because the name of your show is Discovering Magic, correct?
Yes, that's one of the shows that I do. That's kind of my sleight of hand, 90-minute to 2-hour kind of exploration of what magic is and why I like magic and celebrate the way that human beings see the world and how we can perceive magic to begin with.
You do not wear the title of magician.
I prefer not. I actually prefer to be called a perceptual engineer. Because it pays better. You add engineer to anything and it pays better. I have always felt somewhat uncomfortable with being called a magician, although, again, I use magic in my performances. My background was theater, and I'm very pleased that I came to magic through theater first because it really focused me on, you know, the craft of performing and developing a distinct character when you're on stage, and then trying as much as possible to use story so that you have a certain arc to what's going on. Now, magic in general is kind of the antithesis to theater. There was a very well-known performer, Neville Maskelyne, had a theater in the Egyptian Hall in England. And he and his partner, David Devant, wrote a book called Our Magic. And in it, they discussed combining theater and magic. And Maskelyne stated quite emphatically that when you combine magic and theater, one must necessarily suffer at the hands of the other. Because the purpose of theater is for people to suspend their disbelief and allow themselves to experience the reality of the story as it's presented out on stage. However, the goal of a magician is to have you know precisely what the reality is on stage and yet present something that's truly impossible. And those two experiences are very hard to reconcile when you're in an audience. Often you're taken out of a story by a moment of astonishment.
And yet, in both cases, you still have to suspend belief, right? Because obviously the coin's not missing. You know that. And I have to pretend it has actually gone somewhere.
Well, that's a very good question. Are you pretending, or are you convinced by your perceptions, by what you see? And really, again, magic is about convincing you that what you see is what's actually happening. It's not so much about asking you to just pretend that it's not there. Because if that was the case, I would never have to make a coin vanish. I would just hold it in my hand, I'd close my hand, and I'd go, it's gone. And you would go,
I would believe it.
Oh, well, you're a lovely audience member, and you can come to any of my shows all the time.
Great. Okay, so you brought up theater, your trip from theater to magic. Why don't you take us on that road? Let's go way back and talk about your theater life and then how you went down that river and ended up on a tributary into magic. How'd that all happen?
Well, it's interesting because in some ways magic did come first. As a child, with first grade, I stumbled upon a magic book. And growing up in Derry, New Hampshire, we had a magician who was internationally known who lived in Derry, Ace Gorham. In fact, he was on the Uncle Gus show for a period of time. But he was also the president of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. He was the president of the Society of American Magicians. He was a president or vice president of Gulf Oil. So he was a wealthy man who enjoyed performing, and he traveled and he talked and happened to go to the church we attended. And so I had seen one of his shows and was fascinated by it. And as a young boy, kids don't have control over pretty much any aspect of their lives. They're told what to do from the moment they wake up till the moment they go to bed. And I stumbled upon this kind of idea of magic. And you go to the local library and you can pick up books on magic and sign them out. And so that kind of gives you a sense that you have some control over the world. So my first show was really in the second grade. I did a school assembly at the Derry Village School and read somebody's mind, actually read the entire audience's mind. They all came up with a number in their collective heads while I was outside of the room, and a member of the audience came up, sat on stage. They put their fingertips on the sides of my temples, and after a moment of consideration, and having them think of the number, I said the number out loud and got gasps from everybody, and so that was pretty fascinating. But I was interested in magic for a couple of years, and then I got out of it. In the fifth grade, I started studying music and theater rather extensively. Music became something I went on to study at college and eventually got a degree in, but I also did theater, beginning in the seventh grade. And after a while, once you start being able to do more and more social things, magic is by its nature not a particularly social endeavor. When you're learning magic, you spend a lot of time on your own practicing and reading and studying and things of that nature. And girls, and so I started doing theater and they were girls. So why would I want to play with a deck of cards when I could hang out with girls? And that's what I did. And so I went on to study music. I was very involved with music. I taught at music camps. And then when I went to college, I double majored in music and theater and taught at theater camps, taught at music camps, and toured. I was very fortunate in college to do a lot of different things, from design to direction. And I got recruited, and I still don't really understand how or why. I was selected to be a seasoned lighting designer for Hackmatack Repertory Theater in Berwick, Maine, when I was a sophomore in college. I had lots of experiences that came my way, although I think a lot of that comes from a lot of people who work in the theater are kind of self-starters. They get interested in an area, they get deeply passionate about it, and then they dive into opportunities. And most of my early theater opportunities were not in school. I didn't really do theater in school with the exception of middle school. My parents moved from Derry to Epsom, New Hampshire, and I got involved with a town band in Epsom, which is where we were living. And one of the guys in the town band who sat next to me playing trumpet happened to do theater, and he's a fairly well local-known community theater person and became known for a lot more. Mal Cameron, who worked at the planetarium right here in Concord for years and years and years, and you can still hear him on NHPR. But his father was a professional magician. So he loaned me some of his dad's books, and he invited me to audition for a local community theater group, and I got a lead role at 16, and I played probably another half a dozen lead roles in 3 years for this community theater group. And again, community theater is different than professional theater in that everybody pretty much does everything. Everybody kind of picks up, helps, they build the sets, they transport stuff, they work on the lighting, the costumes, all that stuff is done by everybody. And at the time, I was particularly fascinated by the process, how it's put together. And so I learned lighting design, I learned set design, and by the time I graduated from high school, I had designed sets, I had designed lights, and I'd been the featured performer in a number of community theaters. And then when I left college, when I went to college, I did college theater extensively. And it wasn't until I actually left college, and I didn't get my degree right away. I was studying at Plymouth State, and Plymouth State was getting ready to tear down the Silver Hall, which was a gymatorium type of space. And it was going to be my senior year, and we were all going to be kind of homeless on campus. And we had also seen a changeover in the teaching staff. And the teaching staff, when I was at Plymouth, was very hands-off. Like, we had a lot of control at the campus. I was a technical fellow for the Department of Music and Theater, which meant I set up lights and sound and music and things of that nature. And I had keys to the building. And we could come and go as we pleased. We had a hand in shaping the season and picking the material. none of which really happens anymore. When you become a bigger, more successful program, and when you have theater spaces that cost multi-millions of dollars to put together, all of a sudden they don't trust the students anymore. And I've got to say, I had an amazing education at Plymouth State, in spite of the fact that it wasn't a conservatory program, in spite of the fact that we had a gymatorium space and a small black box. And the teachers there did care about us substantially, but they were not as, today we call parents helicopter parents who are really on top of stuff. We really had some control, and I learned a lot from that. So I didn't actually get back into, when I left college the first time, and it took me a long time to get my degree. I went back and did it in fits and spurts, and finally got my degree, which I was supposed to graduate in 1991. It only took till 2011 to get the music degree. But when I left college, I was doing more community theater and working for a friend of mine who was a director at the local community theater. And I happened to be dating a woman who because you and I did theater together, and she was stage manager of at least one of the productions that you and I did together. And I stumbled upon a magic book that I had when I was a kid, and she bought it for me, and kind of the rest is history. I got obsessed with magic, and I studied it anywhere between 2 to 6 hours a day. And for the first 2 years, people hired me sporadically. And then after about 2 years, I had to quit every job I had to perform full time, because I just didn't have the time to do all the other things that I was doing, teaching high school theater. I was managing a typesetting company, and I was the director of a community center. When you're young, you hustle and you do a lot of different things. And I just got very busy traveling as a performer, and it paid a heck of a lot better than any of the other work, so you follow it.
Do you still do a lot of it today?
Performing?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit. That's how I pay the bills, really. Magic is a job for me. It's an avocation. I love it. I study it. I still stay very involved. As far as a performer goes, one time I was doing as many as 300, almost 400 shows a year.
What?
I was doing a lot of private events. I was also performing at bars and restaurants, so I'd be performing 6 hours a week just doing table-to-table magic. And when you're seen a lot in a public venue, a lot of people book you. And early in my career, I did what a lot of magicians do early in their career, which are kids' birthday parties, because they're easy to book. And once you start doing one, and the parents start telling the other parents, and the kids start telling the other kids, you can do 4 or 6 a weekend, because they're only 45-minute shows. Thankfully, I don't work at that degree anymore. The last birthday party I actually did was for a friend of mine who was on the Ed Sullivan Show 8 times. He was on the Tonight Show 24 times, and he called me up and said, I've got my granddaughter. I want her to see a magician, and I don't do that kind of stuff. So when he asked me for recommendations of other magicians to perform for his granddaughter's birthday party, I said, you know what, I know a few people, but it would be an honor if you let me do it. And I went and performed the show for an hour, and he came up afterwards and was blown away by how I could keep a group of 4 to 6-year-olds completely engaged for over an hour. So there's different specialties within the trade, but magic and theater share a lot in terms of it's all performance. Its goal, however, is different. In theater, we're telling stories, and the hope is that audiences walk away and they've learned something about someone else, or something that perhaps it moves them emotionally. They get to put themselves vicariously into a story. Whereas magic, and really, unlike all the other performing arts, every performing art is about telling a story. If you're a dancer, you're telling a story through movement. If you're an actor, you're telling it through spoken word and movement. If you're a musician, you're telling a story that connects with people emotionally. Magic is different in that the magician is actually he's crafting a story in which the audience members are a part. So the necessity of the audience to be willing to not just passively witness a story, but to engage themselves emotionally and be moved by the strange and weird occurrences that happen, creates a story that they go on to tell other people. I like to talk about myself as kind of the tour guide of the impossible and the absurd. I'm the catalyst of the story, and our story, the story we create in every performance that I do, is unique, because it's unique to the participants, the people who are there. I know kind of where I'm going, but I also, and I think good actors do this a lot as well, you also leave yourself open to discovery of the moment, of what's happening in front of you. So theater and magic for me have always kind of been woven together. And while I'm fascinated by a good piece of magic, oftentimes I am disconnected, because for most magicians, the magic is enough. Just do something that causes a reaction. So most magic tricks are fundamentally stunts, and a stunt, while it can be amusing, while it can be moving, while it can be engaging, while it can be terrifying, is fundamentally non-impactful. It happens, it's over, and it doesn't resonate long-term for people unless you engage, unless you really can get the audiences to feel. And I think some of the best magicians do their best work by letting the audience in and finding ways to connect through their character and through their story in a way that audiences can be empathetic. They can see themselves in the role of the magician.
It's very primal. I mean, I would guess the vast majority of people are fascinated with it, are they not?
I don't know. It's hard for me to know now. I think a lot of people are fascinated with it, but I think that a lot of people have a very limited perspective on what it is. I think that I don't want to call them a new crop, because a lot of the guys who I have the most respect for within our industry are guys who've been performing full-time 30, 40 years or longer. And they have learned to reconcile the shortcomings of magic as a performance art by engaging with people in raw, meaningful ways. I think that the popular image of a magician with top hat and tails and rabbits and doves and canes and candles is fundamentally a caricature of the industry. And I don't think that people really know what magic is. And so I am perfectly happy to take advantage of that in a performance. Whenever possible, I begin my shows in a way either that is magic, but it's completely nonsensical and has no part of the show that they're about to experience. That's just a stunt to startle them, and then kind of to pull the rug out from under it, to say, okay, that's not what we're going to be doing. Or to start as a human and interact with the audiences in a way before I begin doing magic, and some of that's by connecting with them, by making eye contact, by kind of acknowledging the fact that we're all sharing the same space and we're breathing the same air, and that I'm not threatening. That when I go out there, I'm an idiot. That's my character. When I go out on stage, I'm kind of an idiot that all this really interesting and weird and strange stuff happens to. And while I have areas of expertise that I'm interested in, like the con games and the shell game and things of that nature, I don't ever really try to take the perspective that I have mystical powers or I'm in charge or I'm smarter than everybody. I'm not. And so when stuff happens that's unexpected, I like to be as responsive or not more responsive than the audience, because I'm surprised along with them. It's much easier to bring people together in a circle if you're being one of them. But if you decide to take that standpoint of, oh, I'm impressive and I'm smart, and whereas I think Jerry Seinfeld told this on the, look, here's a quarter, it's gone, you're an idiot, which is kind of unfortunately how a lot of magicians do. And I'm not talking down on other magicians. I think it's like any other phase of development. We all go through certain phases of our interest levels, and some of us transcend each level as we need to become a better performer. My first magic show as an adult was really an embarrassment. I have friends who are incredibly indulgent in my fascination with magic, and I did like 60 tricks in 60 minutes. It was terrible. It was awful. I was subjecting them to magic. And yet, at no point was I respecting the experience of magic in a way that people could have a breather. Some of my best work by actors are not when they're on stage saying something or moving. It's when they're on stage still and breathing and they're listening.
Great point.
They're reflecting their moment. And that's when people draw in. I think I have a lot of influences in my magic, and most of them are not magicians. One of my biggest influences in magic is a man by the name of Avner, Avner the Eccentric. He was a mime. He is a mime and clown and in some instances magician. And I've known Avner for years. He was the Jewel in Romancing the Stone, like the Jewel of the Nile, the movie. He played the Jewel. And he's a wonderful physical performer, and he does workshops on clowning. And one of his big things is about breathing, that if you hold your breath, audiences will hold it with you. And they don't know they're holding their breath. They just do it instinctively. And so they sense the tension. They sense the excitement. And by quieting things down, you actually create a level of importance. You're reflecting that something very interesting is about to happen, or something important is going to happen. And when I say important, I don't mean on the grand scheme of things, but within the little context of the play that we're doing, whether it's an actual play or, a simple magic trick of 3 phases, it gives an audience time to catch up. When I lecture to magicians, and this is something that I think is possibly applicable to theater, but when I lecture to magicians, I talk about the fact that audiences experience magic 3 times. So if they see a piece of magic, their first initial response is to look at you as the performer and go, did I just see that? The next reaction is to look to the person next to them and go, did you just see that? And then when they get that confirmation, they turn back to the performer and they go, I did see that. And it's very easy, just like a laugh if you're a comedian, to step on that. And what happens is those moments that the audience needs to process what's happened, and those moments that draw people together are lost. And eventually you feel, for whatever reason, somewhat unfulfilled by an experience because you have tried to take in too much information and you've never been given the chance to process it.
That's a great analogy. You mentioned earlier, and I was going to get to it later, other magicians who you have a great respect for. And recently on Facebook, you've been posting about some of them that have been passing away. Could you name some of them and then tell why you have such great respect for them individually? What was it about, I don't know, their work ethic or their whatever it was that really drove you to have the respect for those people?
Sure. A lot of the people that I consider my mentors, several of them I've never met. I've learned through books. I've learned through film. I've been able to see their work and study them from afar. I've been very fortunate in what I do to meet a lot of the people that I've learned from and whose work has inspired me. And in the last couple of years, we've lost a lot of people in the magic industry. Ricky Jay just passed away, and while I was not a friend of Ricky Jay's, we have met once before. We sat side by side at a conference. I'm the editor of Magic History Journal, and Ricky had a huge fascination for magic history. And as a performer, he took no prisoners. He went out there. He was almost combative with audiences. This is what you're going to see. You're not going to believe you're going to see it. I'm going to do it anyways. You're going to like it. And they did. And Ricky was a scholar. He studied strange and unusual people who did things interesting. He published a whole book that nobody will be able to read except for magicians, because there were very limited amount of these books published, on a magician and artist by the name of Matthew Buchinger. And Buchinger had no arms, had no hands, had no feet, and yet he fathered a large number of children. We're talking 20 plus. He would perform magic tricks, and he would create the finest of art. He would write the Lord's Prayer, for example, in letters so small you can't really see it without a magnifying glass. And yet he had no hands, he had no feet. And he sold his work all around Europe. He performed before crown royalty, not because he was disabled, but because he had other abilities, other attributes, and a capacity that belied the challenges that were in front of him. And Ricky was a chronicler of this. Learned Men and Fireproof Women, Learned Pigs and Fireproof Women is one of the books that he published. And it really looked at the people who, for whatever reason, make a mark in the world that's unique, that has never been seen before. And he was fascinated by that. So Ricky Jay was somebody who I knew from afar and whose work I admired. And I only got to meet him once, and again through one of these magic history conferences that I'm involved with. But most recently, Johnny Thompson passed away. And Johnny Thompson, again, most people probably have never seen him and never heard of him, but if you've ever seen a magician in the 21st century, now in the latter part of the 20th century, almost all of them have been influenced by Johnny. Johnny did an act called The Great Thompsonian Company. It was a parody of a magic act. He came out as a tuxedo and tails, and he had medals, and he would produce birds, but he was a pompous ass who took himself way too seriously, and his assistant was a gum-snapping bimbo Vegas showgirl who didn't take any of it seriously. And they had this classic kind of battle on stage. He would be sneering at her, and then she would one-up him on stage. But that was his act, and that's what he toured around the world with. He performed everywhere. I mean, everywhere. He's been on television. He's been on cruise ships. He's been on just everywhere. But Johnny was a consummate student of magic. He was an accomplished, we refer to him as, or did, as the general practitioner of magic. He performed in every venue. He didn't just do the Thompsonian act. He also did trade shows. He did private parties and events. He worked resorts. Anywhere he could make a buck doing magic, he did. And he was a student of magic, and he was also around at a time when some of the earlier greats, we've had a series of greats that have passed away. Like I said, I was influenced by some people who I've never met. Al Baker was one, and Al Baker, passed away before I was even born, but he had an enormous impact on people. Johnny studied the work of Di Vernon and Charlie Miller, who were previous greats. Again, people, unless you study magic, you wouldn't know these names. Johnny kind of picked up the torch and kept moving forward. And most recently, when I say most recently, Johnny has also been a consultant to pretty much every major act. If you've heard of Lance Burton, who was multi-million-dollar performer at the Tropicana Hotel and other hotels in Vegas, Johnny taught Lance how to do what he did. And he probably influenced directly hundreds, if not thousands, of people by helping them with their act. He was overly generous. He would help anybody be better. If you wanted to be better, you talked to Johnny. Johnny would help you. And it didn't matter whether you paid him or not. There's stories of Johnny, and the Facebook feeds were just filled. All of my friends have great stories about Johnny. He would be at a convention, and some kid would come up and say, "Can you tell me where I should go to learn about doves?" "Oh, where do you live, kid?" "Oh, I live just south of Las Vegas." "Oh, come on over the house. I'll teach you." And he did. And then he wouldn't accept a penny from this kid. He was just trying to help and trying to give back. Now, Johnny was not always the easiest person to work with. He was very opinionated. He had very particular ideas about how magic should be presented and how one interacts with audiences, and also the honest side of magic. He was also very much a skeptic. He was very much in favor of letting audiences in on the joke. These are tricks. I work very hard to do something you can't see so that you can experience something. And it's like any other job. We all work hard, but I'm not going to come and tell you that I have supernatural abilities and things of that nature. And he worked for some people as a consultant that he had challenges with, and he left their position. He left working for them. He could have used the money, I'm sure, but he left on principle, that he didn't like the work that they were doing. He didn't like the approach they were taking, and so he left. I had a great opportunity to interview Johnny for about 2 hours. I was involved with a kind of a 60 Minutes of Magic. It was a television show that had different segments, and my segment was called Continuum. And I interviewed performers who were past their major years of performing that had a lot to impart in terms of magic. And Johnny was one of these people I interviewed, and we spent about 2 hours talking to get about 36 minutes that we actually ended up airing. But again, he was warm, genuine, generous. Eugene Berger, another performer that almost nobody's ever seen unless you follow magic. Gene wrote probably a dozen, maybe 15 books on magic. He studied philosophy. He also studied religion in college. And he didn't become a full-time magician until the age of 39, which is very old for that type of a thing. And he went on to become a major mover and shaker in how to present magic in a certain way. He didn't really invent anything, yet he published book after book after book about ways to take somebody else's trick and improve on it and to do better. And Gene had learned that from Don Allen, who was another magician that I learned from. So there's no shortage of people that I could share with you who have been a significant influence on my life. The ones that I mostly take those stories away from are the ones that seem to tie into my personal experiences as a performer in the theater world.
I don't want to forget, so I want to get it in here now. Can you tell us about Harry Anderson and your connection there?
Yeah, Harry, I never got to meet, I think I did meet Harry Anderson, now that I think about it. Early on in my years as a magician, in the late 80s, early 90s, I used to go to a magic convention, Hank Lee's Cape Cod Conclave. It doesn't exist anymore. And I got to meet a lot of really great performers there. And at the same time, I had started a magic shop, and so guys wanted to come and perform. I got to see Harry and his wife perform at one of these early conventions. And we likely met then, but it wasn't really till later on. Back in the early 2000s, I developed, in the late 90s, I developed a fascination for the 3-shell game, which is a con game with 3 shells, 1 pea, and you mix them up and you bet. And, it looks like it's a game, and it is a game of sorts, but it's all fixed. You cannot win this game. And Harry had presented in one of his television specials the 3-shell game entirely to music. It was a beautiful composed piece where he just took this guy's money. And when I started making shells for the 3-shell game, and I sent them off to a number of people whose work I admired and people who had influenced me in the shell game work. And I sent a set to Harry, and Harry called me, and these are wonderful, these are beautiful shells. But you know what, there's one little thing that if you wanted to do this, and I said, well, Harry, I'd love to do that. It may take me a little while. He's like, yeah, you do that. It'd be great because I would love. So, and we spent hours on the phone talking about the shell game and talking about, do you know what the original peas that the grafters used to actually make them with? Well, I'll tell you, it was a horse. I'm not going to say it because it's actually quite vile and disgusting. But Harry was very, very funny. He was very, very giving. And, for somebody who was a celebrity, he really was known for his work on Night Court. And originally he was featured on Cheers, I think was the first television show he was on. So Cheers, and then he had his own show, Night Court, and then Dave's World. And he was a celebrity, but he was a student of magic, and he was a collector of magic. He had 2 shops. He actually had a magic shop in New Orleans called Spade and Archer. He also had another magic shop that was like in his home, and then he created his own nightclub in New Orleans as a place for him and his friends to play. And it wasn't like he was being hired to work there. He was just doing it for the love of it and to be able to continue to perform. And Harry was one of the most creative and hardest working magicians I've ever met. If you want, you can go today online onto YouTube and look up his appearances on Saturday Night Live. He did some amazing, really brilliant pieces of theater that used magic to communicate. Like I said, Harry, whenever I called Harry, he'd pick up his phone. He didn't have somebody answering the phone for him. I had his number. He would answer the phone. Harry, when he was young, he was a street performer, and he performed in the streets of San Francisco and other cities doing street magic, and that's where he honed his character. And he was a member of a group called the Left-Handed League, which was a bunch of magicians and comedians who were left-handed. And so the group consisted of Harry Anderson, Turk Pipkin, who's an internationally renowned speaker and artist now, but you can see Turk in some of Harry's early specials. Martin Lewis, who was a second-generation magician. Mike Caveney, who is now one of the foremost magic scholars on magic history in the world and probably has one of the largest collections of magic history in the world. And Jay Johnson, the ventriloquist. And they used to stage shows together early on in their development of their individual characters. And each of them went on to become leaders in their own field. But like I said, Harry was a student up until the very end. In fact, one of the women I went to college with at Plymouth became the president of his fan club. And she used to, because she lived down in his neck of the woods, and she used to answer at the magic shop periodically for him. But Harry was just a lovely guy. The Magic History Conference that I'm involved with for the New England Magic Collectors, it's called the Yankee Gathering. I got more involved in the last couple of years as kind of producing the shows. And so I was trying to get a reunion of all the Left-Handed League on stage because we were featuring Mike Caveney as the guest of honor. And I thought it would be really fun to surprise Mike by bringing all these people together. And I put out the call, and for the first time ever, Harry did not answer his phone. And I thought that was very strange, but I contacted Martin Lewis and I contacted a couple of other people. And Martin was all on board and was really excited to have it happen. And he said, well, Harry's working through some things right now, but if he has a chance, he'll get right back to you. So I called him, every few weeks or so. And then finally we were stunned and he had passed away. And Harry had had a stroke and was recovering from the stroke. And then apparently I don't know if he had another stroke. I don't know that they've ever released the information. But that was the reason he hadn't gotten back to me. In fact, Martin had told me after Harry died that he was aching to tell me what was going on. But everybody was Harry didn't want people to know that he was in rough shape. So it was very hard, and Mike and Martin came together, and I did hear after the fact from some of the other members. But, Harry was a substantial person in the world of popular culture. Harry was a substantial person in the world of magic, and I was very fortunate to at least be able to reach out and talk with him. He gave me permission to several of his bits. A number of years ago, I wrote an original musical called Phantasmagoria Cabaret, which we staged here in Concord, actually, for Concord TV as a fundraiser. And one of the bits in the show, I had some ideas of playing the mystical Milo, the mini mind reader. He was, at one point in time, Milo was a legitimate little person who would do fortune telling and read minds from the stage. But in the story of this musical, the performance troupe had gotten on hard times and they couldn't afford to print new posters, so a full-bodied person put on a body, strapped it on the neck, and so the head was the only part that was really human and the rest was... And Harry had an act, I don't remember whether it was lefty-righty or righty-lefty. It was about the one-legged tap dancer, and it was the funniest. You didn't ever get to see it because it was not particularly politically correct in lots of ways. But again, Harry was interested in the same people that Ricky Jay were interested. He was interested in people who they didn't feel they had adversity. They just had who they were. And they used it to best strength. And in fact, Harry used to do so he gave me some tips on how to work this and how to hide it. And he gave me permission to use those. And we had a bit in the show that Harry did on Saturday Night Live where he would have his wife tied up in rope and he would be in a straitjacket and they would have a competition to see who could get out first. And Harry would cheat. Like he would go over and he would be physically abusive. He would kick his wife over the chair onto the floor so that because she was getting ahead of him.
Oh, man.
And I mean, it was really, really very visual and very funny. And I asked him for permission to use that bit in the show. And he said, sure, I'm happy to let you, Again, for somebody who's so big and has created stuff, they could get selfish about their work or they could be generous. And again, I've been very fortunate to be around people who are very generous.
If you could speak with someone who you've never spoken with, past or present, in your field, who would that be, and what question would you ask them?
That's a hard one, because there are so many people that I would like to be able to talk with. There was a man by the name of Max Malini, and Max was a diminutive. When I say diminutive, he was probably 4'8", small man who spoke with an accent. He was Jewish, and he was very accomplished as a sleight of hand artist. And he was a huge ego. I mean, just tremendous ego. And he did street performance magic for royalty. Like he performed for all the crowned heads of Europe. In fact, there's a story of Max Malini performing in Versailles, and he was performing, one of the pieces he did was what we call the card stab, where a card has been selected, signed, mixed up on a table, and all of the cards are spread out on the table, and he'd put a blindfold on, and they would spread the cards around more, and then he would take a knife out, and he would stab into the table and lift up one card, and it would be the signed card, all done completely blindfolded. Well, he did it with a Louis XIV table. We're talking a priceless antique, and after the show, somebody came up to him and said, Mr. Malini, you do realize that was a priceless table. It was a Louis XIV table. To which Max Malini said, yes, and now it is more valuable because they can say, here, Max Malini stabbed right here and found my card. And he was, just a giant. He was truly a giant. And yet the only information we have of Malini, we have his ephemera, we have stories of well-known magicians who knew Max and saw Max perform, but most of Max's work is legendary and nobody knows how he did it. Max would be invited to a party and he would sit there and he would have dinner, and then at some point, after the meal was over, somebody would say, Max, would you do some magic? And he would stand up and, does anyone have a hat? And they would hand him a hat, and he would set the hat on the table. He would tap the hat with a fork and lift up the hat, and there would be a huge brick of ice, like probably 12 pounds of ice, and there's nowhere it could have come from. He had not left the table. He had been there the entire time. Nobody had gone near him. And he would just do these amazing pieces of magic that were really designed to flabbergast people and to drive interest to see what else he did. And so Max had a very limited, not limited, that's not the right word. He had a very refined set list. So he had like 12 things that he did, and he did really, really, really well. But it was his personality. He just, again, for some guy who probably would have been, running a deli somewhere and ignored, he went around and he made millions of dollars performing these unusual things. And it wasn't just the magic. It was really the force of his personality. In fact, today, if you really want to, you can see Max Malini's influence if you go to see Steve Cohen, who performs. He was at the Waldorf Hotel for almost 20 years performing, I think 20 years. He performs one or two of Max's pieces in his show, but Steve is known as the Millionaire's Magician, and he's targeted that place. He charges $100 a ticket or more to see, and 30 people can see his show, and that's about it. But Max is a person who I would have loved to have picked his brain and found out where he came from. He was reported to have written an autobiography. So he wrote a biography of himself. And I've read it in a book that was published in the 30s or 40s saying that Max is writing his autobiography. And then I heard through the grapevine that Max's son, Oziel, O-Z-I-E-L, was still alive. So I have some chutzpah myself, and I called up Ozzy and I introduced myself and gave him some of my background. And after some pleasantries, we talked. And, after I demonstrated my knowledge of his father's work, and, I said, I asked the question, I said, do you have your father's autobiography? It's never been published. Can you tell me what your plans are and what you hope to do? And on the other end of the phone, I hear, and I'm waiting for something terrible, like it got burnt up in a fire and was the only whatever. And so he revealed to me that he had taught, that another magician had asked him recently about it, and he, had invited this guy to visit him, and he taught this other performer his father's magic and gave him the autobiography, the original copy of it. And he left, and he had plans to do a book. This was 25 years ago. So Ozzy on the other end of the line is like, I gave it to him. This was about 6 months ago, and I haven't heard a word since. And at this point, I don't think I'm going to ever get it back. And I called him about a year later and tried to follow up. He was very unhappy. And the other magician, I'm not going to mention his name. He is involved in the magic community. He does come up to magic history conferences, and every once in a while, I ask him about this project because Ozzy died before he ever got a chance to see it. But Max is one of those guys that I would like to know, how is it that you got into doing this? Where did you learn the material that you did? What did you create? And what is it about how you present magic that really connects with audiences? I mean, I know why it connects with me, and I've never seen him. I've just seen pictures and heard the stories, but I want to know why. Another performer who I've never met, but I've studied extensively, his name was Dai Vernon. Some people at the West Coast call him Dai Vernon, D-A-I. And Dai may be correct because his name was David Werner. So, it all depends on what side of the country you're from. But he became known as the professor, and he lived to, I think, 98 years old. And he was well known for a certain style of magic. He was known as the man who fooled Houdini because he did repeatedly. Like Houdini used to proclaim that he couldn't be fooled by anybody, especially if they did it 3 times for him. He could tell them exactly how everything worked. And Vernon used what Houdini knew against him. And he did something that Houdini would never have believed that somebody would have the chutzpah to do, which was to use, a gimmicked piece of equipment that Houdini would just say, you would never do this. And this person never uses these things, so it can't be that, so it's got to be something else. And he fooled him to the point where Bess Houdini had to haul Houdini away out of the room. But Vernon wrote a book on Max Malini and his magic, and Vernon got most of it wrong. But yet he's incredibly well-loved in the magic community, and Johnny Thompson was a student of Dai Vernon. And so I've never met Dai Vernon. I never had that opportunity. I'm an East Coast guy, and Dai, at the time when I had the opportunity, I would have had to go to the Magic Castle. Doug Henning was a student of Vernon's. Ricky Jay was a student of Vernon's. Pretty much anybody who's done cards is really a Vernon kind of acolyte. And Vernon believed in being natural. So the reason I wasn't as impressed, because I saw Vernon perform and I went, doesn't really do anything for me. He's an innovator. He's created some stuff, but he kept telling magicians to just be natural. In everything you do, when you're performing, don't do anything special, do anything fancy, just be natural. And yet my theatrical upbringing that's part of what we do. I mean, if you think of, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, wrote and actor prepares, Konstantin Stanislavski wrote, and one of my favorite quotes in all of performance art is, "It is the purpose of art to make the difficult customary, the customary easy, and the easy beautiful." It's a process. Yeah. We really want to take what you do and work really hard to the point where you transcend technique. And so all of Stanislavski, in terms of acting, is about being natural. What he wrote for books, An Actor's Life, or Actor Prepares, and those books are really about trying to get actors to get out of their own way And that's what Vernon spoke to. And I already knew that lesson. So for me, it was like a retread of that kind of stuff. And so I looked at his other stuff. So I've had a few people in magic who I've become very friendly with and I have great respect for. I've also frustrated the heck out of them because every time we get together, I want to ask, so tell me more about Di Vernon. I don't get this reverence that you have for him. In fact, my question is, why Di? That's what I ask them. I say, why Di? Tell me. Well, if you didn't know him, you just aren't going to get it. I'm like, that's not the way it should be. I should be able to study him. I should be able to understand what the lessons are. But so Max, the question, getting back to your original question, Max is probably one of a very short list of people that I would ask. And I guess the question would be, what is the most important thing for a performer to know before they step foot in front of an audience?
You've obviously seen tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tricks. What trick stands out in your mind that just boggles your mind as a magician? You go, okay, that's impressive.
Good timing on your part, because I will confess that I am pretty disillusioned when it comes to magic. I have seen a lot of magic, but not as much as some, because early on in my work, I made the choice to try not to watch magic because I didn't want to be influenced by other people's work. I'm a natural mimic, and I would want to chase down that, oh, look, a squirrel, and I want to run down and be a bunch of different performers, and I didn't want to do that. I had enough very good influences that now you go beyond that and try to find out, what do you have to say? However, I had the opportunity last summer to go down to New York. Very rarely do I go and out of my way to see magic shows, and yet for one weekend I went and saw 4. A group of friends of mine suggested I really need to get down and see a play with magic called In and of Itself. And this was a play that had run in California, and it ran its 6-week run, and then it got extended another 6 weeks, and another 6 weeks, and then it ran almost a year, and then it got transferred to New York. And it was in a little theater, 175-seat theater. It was produced by Neil Patrick Harris. It was directed by Frank Oz. Yes, Frank Oz, wow. Fozzie Bear, early work of the Muppets, Miss Piggy, but acclaimed film director and a solid thinker, like a very, very smart man. So we went down to New York and we saw a bunch of plays. We saw Steve Cohen, and that was the first time I saw Steve Cohen live, and it was a great show. It was fun. It was very throwback, kind of. He wears tuxedo. He does the parlor magician, and he's very charming and very good at what he does. Then we went and saw a street magician and working performer at the the New York Historical Society had an exhibit on magic, and he was performing in the lobby. And then I went and saw In and of Itself. In and of Itself is the best piece of theater I've ever seen that was not theater, and it was the finest magic show I've ever seen that was not a magic show. It was quite literally in and of itself. The run ended a couple of weeks after I got a chance to see it. When you arrive, you hang out in the bar, and in the bar they have one of these step and repeat, which is like a big banner that people walk in front of and get their picture taken.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this was a wall of these little cards that had a phrase, I am a, or I am an, and underneath it was, well, it could be a job, it could be a position, it could be a role, like I am a mother, I am a sociopath, I am a pool boy. And there were literally thousands of these printed on this sign. Then when they opened the doors, we walked downstairs and then walked in front of an entire wall unit, that's probably 3 times as large as what we saw in the bar, with the actual cards on it. And we were invited to take one card. And we took this card that we identified with, and then we held on to it. And then they invited us to enter the auditorium one at a time. And they would take and tear off the part of the card that you said that you identified with and set it in a stack. And then you went and sat in your seat. And no explanation for any of this. You just did it. And, you don't know what's going on. And really, in a lot of ways, ambiguity is an underutilized tool in the magician's toolkit. And frankly, in theater. I think the best theater requires engagement by the audience. It doesn't just hand them stuff. So anyway, we sit down and we look at this set. And the set was a big wall, and on the wall there were a number of windows. And each window there was like a museum exhibit. There was an exhibit that showed a mannequin with a gun in its hand. There was an exhibit of a wolf's head with a deck of cards in it. There was an exhibit of a pedestal with a bottle of scotch or wine or something. There was a window with pigeonholes for mail. There was another window with, there were 6 different windows. can't remember. Scales. They were scales at one. And so he starts the show. He walks out on the stage. This is Derek Del Gaudio. Derek's a performance artist. He's a magician, but he's a performance artist as well. And he walks out and he looks at the audience and says, "Hi, everything you're going to see tonight was written down. And it's been rehearsed. All of this scenery was designed to affect you in specific ways. Every light in this entire venue was specifically placed and focused and colored to elicit some sort of reaction from you. And it's important that you know that, because everything that you are going to experience is devised." That being said, let's get started. So it wasn't a story. It was a one-man show. And during the show, each of these fixtures on the walls, he told a story, something personal about his life. He started with a story of him performing as a magician in Spain, and he was in a bar eating, and this old guy next to him tells him this story about El Rouletier. There was this bar, and when I tell people about this play, I essentially reenact the entire play because it was that powerful. But he tells this story about this bar in Spain where people would go in and there was a gun and a bullet on the bar, and people would put money down in the bar, and they would bet, and there would be all sorts of side bets going on around it. They would bet, and the person would put the bullet in the gun, spin it, put it to their head, and pull the trigger. Now, if the gun did not fire, all of their troubles were over, because they would get a cut of all of the betting action around them, and they would get doubled whatever was on the table. If they pulled the trigger and the bullet went off, all their troubles were over.
Oh, man.
Because they don't have them anymore. So this had become a little local legend, and, it happens as time does that it goes one way or the other. Well, one day this man walked in, and he did it, and he put the gun to his head, pulled the trigger, and nothing happened, and he collected his money, and he left. And that had happened many, many, many times in the bar. What had not happened was the second day, when the same guy walked back into the bar, and he did it again. Click. Took his share of the earnings and left. Came back day 3. Day 4, day 5,
What?
Day 6, day 7, click, click, click. Never hit him. Week 2, he comes back in, and he sets a second bullet down on the table. He puts both bullets into the thing. Click, nothing. Week 3, a third bullet. Week 4, a fourth bullet. Week 5, a fifth bullet.
What?
Week 6, a sixth bullet. 6 bullets in the chamber. There are no more empty spots. He fills the revolver, pulls it to his head. The entire room at this point, because this has become massive. There are hundreds of people expecting to see this guy kill himself. And he sets it down on the table and walks away, and he's not heard from again. Until a few years later, when he's living in retirement by himself, taking his earnings from all of this, built a lovely estate and whatnot. And one night he has a burglar who breaks into his house and holds a revolver on him. To which this man looked at him and said, are you crazy? Do you not know who I am? And he had been given the name El Rouletier because he had played this. I am El Rouletier. There is no way I can be killed. And the burglar holds up the revolver, pulls the trigger, and kills him. That's it. That's the story. That's the story he was told at this bar. And during this, as he's describing the story, the mannequin, the arm comes up and it illustrates it up on the stage. And so at this point, Derek looks at the audience and he goes, now, I looked at the guy and I said, why would you tell me this story? I'm just sitting here trying to eat dinner at a bar in Spain. Why would you tell me this? To which the old guy in the bar who told the story to Derek said, because you are El Rouletier. And he picked up his stuff and he left. Derek didn't see him again. He's gone. And this plagued Derek. And throughout his life, he's trying to figure out, why did this guy call me this? How is it that I am this person? And so during the course of this show, and this was all musically scored by Mark Mothersbaugh, who was in Devo, who scored dozens of films, and he did I always say this, he did the music for Rugrats. He and his brother, amazing composer. Each of the stories had a musical theme. And so periodically during the show, the theme would come up, and Derek would look up, and he'd look at the mannequin, and then he'd look down, and then he can just continue on. So it kept building this tension throughout the show. And he did a number of pieces of the show, and then at the very end, he's done all of these things, but it comes back to El Rouletier. Because the last piece in Derek's show, you know those cards that I told you about that it said, I am Anne?
Yeah.
So he goes out at one point in the show, takes one of the cards out of the center, a pool boy, or whatever it was. The day I was there, it was a pool boy. And said, whoever identified as a pool boy come down, and he did a piece with the pool boy, which ended up being he had him select one of these random envelopes from one of the windows, and in that envelope there was a personal letter, and he had the guy who identified as a pool boy open it up and read it. It was a handwritten letter from the guy's mother to him. Not to Derek, but to the guy from the audience that was pulled up out of the audience randomly. And we got to see, as an audience, we got to see him transform from a pool boy into something more than that. Because as he read this emotional letter from his mother, he broke down. And every night, that was going to be different because it was a different person every show. And so that's only 2 of the stories. And then at the very end, Derek goes through and he has everybody, when you came in, you selected a card. And some of you took it with great seriousness. Some of you took it as a joke. If the card meant some sort of meaning to you when you selected it, please stand. And about half the audience stands, probably anywhere between 75 to 95 people stand. And as he walks through the artists, he looks at each one of them in the eye and he tells them what they select. These cards have been sitting on stage the entire time. There's no way he could know. I have no idea how this works. He told everybody all of this, and at the end he says, now I can tell all of you who you are because of who you have identified with, but as you can see, you're all more than that. Just as Bill was more than a pool boy, you are all more than that. I, however, realize I am El Rouletier. And he takes his hand and he raises it to his temple, and he pulls his finger, and you hear a shot, and the lights go dark, and then they immediately come up. And when they come up, you hear this huge bang in the dark. And when they come up, he's still standing on there on stage. He's fine. But when you turn around and you look at the stage, all of the windows that were on stage, they aren't there anymore. They're all posters that have fallen down onto the floor in front. It's an amazing, startling, just transformation that, we know there's a trick, but it doesn't matter there's a trick because each of these stories, are they real or are they not? But you asked me about, are there pieces of magic that he did in his show? Yeah, all of them. There was one piece in particular that I don't know how it is done. I don't want to know how it's done. I have an idea how it might be done, but it meant much more as a concept. There was a philosopher who wrote "Ceci n'est un pipe," which is this is not a pipe, but it's a picture of a pipe. It's a kind of a puzzle mind game. When you say this is not a pipe, but it is a pipe, what is it? Well, he has a piece called "This Is Not a Brick," and so one of the windows had a brick in it, and it was smashing through a window. It's a gold brick, and he comes out and he tells a story about his life, about this brick, and how when he was a boy, his father left them, and his mother got into a relationship with a woman, and when he was in elementary school, he was bullied because his family was different. And one night when he was sleeping, a brick was thrown through his window in the middle of the night and terrorized the family. And so now he tells this whole story about the brick. Well, I've had the brick painted gold, just spray painted. It's not real gold or anything, but I've had it painted gold to kind of remind me of the fact that, you can choose in this world to hate and to destroy, or you can choose to build and grow. And I keep it as a reminder. He sets it down on his table. Then he has done a bunch of card tricks, but as he's telling this story, he starts to build a card castle around it. So he's kind of all these cards stacked up, and it completely obscures you from view. And he stands to the end of the table and he blows. All the cards just go and collapse flat on the table. The brick. He's on stage. He's 6-8 feet away from me, has vanished. But it hasn't just vanished, because you can't just vanish something and not have it return. That's theatrically unsatisfying. So he says, that brick means something to you now in the way it means to me. However, if you go to, name a street, name an intersecting street in New York, so Lexington and 45th or whatever. If you go to the corner at Lexington 45th right now, on the corner of the street, you will see a gold brick, this gold brick, sitting on the street right on the edge of the curb. Please, after the show, feel free to go and visit it, take pictures, leave it there, because there are thousands, tens of thousands of people walking by that brick who have no idea what it means, and yet you and I know what it means. And while this is a brick, it's not a brick. And so it's storytelling of the rarest form. It's magic that's not meant to fool, but it does, but it has a higher meaning. Now, I am nowhere near that level. As a performer, there's lots that I'm content to do just to do it, just for the reactions. But that moment, when that brick, when the cards collapsed, is a moment of magic so perfect, because it's so elegantly tied into storytelling and meaning, that at the moment that vanished, I did not want to do magic anymore. I walked out of the theater going, I have seen perfection. I don't need to see it. I don't want to know it. Anything I do after this fact is going to feel disappointing in comparison. That was my initial response. And then we got in the car afterwards. We went to see David Blaine finish his world tour in Brooklyn, New York, in his hometown, and I got to see him hold his breath for 10 minutes underwater live on stage. Again, completely shocking difference. I don't know how he did it, except he did it. That's sometimes what you have to do is it's not magic, it's just something you do. Yeah. Something becomes so impossible looking because no one would believe, and this is really a lesson in magic. If you want to learn a lesson in magic, magic is all about assumptions, using what people know against them. And just like Max Malini producing a block of ice, I can only assume he had that block of ice on him for the entire time. But to have that level of commitment to hold a piece of ice in the off chance that somebody might ask him to do something and then to produce it is a level of commitment, just like an athlete who breaks records. The amount of hours that it takes to develop the technique and the commitment and the pain and the suffering and the sacrifice that you have to do to be able to do something special, to create a moment of astonishment, whether it's real or pretend, is something truly beautiful and something that can be very inspiring for those of us who maybe don't feel like we have a life that might be inspiring to others. Nobody knows what we suffer through. Nobody knows what choices we've made in our lives and how we've had to suffer by those choices. And lots of people give up. So who do we look for? We look for the exceptional ones. And unfortunately, the exceptional ones suffer more.
This is everything I had hoped it would be.
Well, thanks. It's stuff I love to talk about. It's stuff that's hard sometimes.
I knew it would be. I have so many more questions, but I want to have you back because I want to take the time to really go through it all. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about Hatbox. How are things going? And you just recently had pitch night?
We had pitch night 2019. We were programming for our 5th season, which is hard to believe.
5 years already.
Yeah, we haven't been there 5 years. It's just a weird vagary of the way seasons are programmed. Our first season would have been 15-16, but we didn't open till 16. So we had a half season. So that was our first season. So our second season was our first full season and how the math works. But yeah, our season's coming up September 1st. We had 44 different groups pitch for the space.
Nice.
Hatbox, for those of you who don't know, Hatbox was modeled on the Players Ring in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in that it's a cooperative theater that goes through a competitive process for its programming. So people come, they show up, they tell what they want to do in a space for 2 minutes, and after that, all of the review team gets together and they review the scripts, they review the projects, and they try to program a season out of it. And people who get selected for the season get 60% of the revenue, and Hatbox provides the space, the equipment, most of the equipment, publicity assistance, box office personnel, all of that kind of stuff. And, the goal is to create a cooperative venue for people to explore and to create and to play in a way that facilitates perhaps more risk. Right now, if you want to rent a theater to do your pet project, it costs a lot of money. And it's very risky. There's no guarantee that you're going to be able to make enough money back from the ticket sales. It also is problematic in that you may not have all of the technical skills to do what you want to do. So Hatbox is kind of, and the Players Ring serve kind of as an intermediary. We provide some of the resources. We provide some of the training if you need it. We do monthly training workshops on a variety of stuff. I just did one on lighting design and how to tell story through light and how lighting impacts the emotional content of scenes and can affect rhythm and stuff like that. But really, Hatbox is a place to play. And we've been very fortunate. Since we've opened, we've had almost 600 performances. Wow. In the space and almost 17,000 people in a little 100-seat venue since we've opened. Now, we could have had a lot more people than that. We have enough capacity to have 20,000 plus a year in the space, but we also present new works. We present original plays. We present published plays, but ones that maybe are lesser known, such as a wonderful play that you were in called True, produced by Square Peg. You guys really missed it. Ray, the work you did on that was magic of the highest order.
Thank you.
Ray really transformed on stage and became Truman Capote. He didn't exist. He was not there as an actor. He embodied Truman Capote in a way that really makes me want to cry right now thinking about it. It was just so beautiful.
Thank you.
But that's the whole point of our space, is to give a place to people to have an opportunity to explore things that they wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity. As a working actor, whether you're doing it professionally or as an avocation, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever chooses to produce work. So there's lots of community theaters that are putting on shows, but most of those serve bigger masters. We have to sell X amount of tickets to make sure it works and things of that nature. And the nice thing about places like the Players Ring and the Hatbox is that we have an opportunity to serve the artists as well as the audiences. And so we want everybody to kind of come together and make it happen. And we've been very fortunate. We've been there. We're about to sign a lease for another 3 years there in the space, which is great. And we have lots of stuff. But we also have we're all about live performance. Most of what we do are plays. We do have musicals in there from time to time. We actually just had auditions for 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, which is
I saw that
in July. I had a really great turnout for that. About 40 people showed up for auditions, which was great for 6 or 7 parts. But we also have concerts. We have storytelling. We have magic. We have burlesque. We have improv comedy, stand-up comedy, all those as well. So the season is broken up into 3-week main stage shows and then 1-week alternative weeks. And during those alternative weeks are when we run concerts and non-theater type of stuff.
Are you finding that the community is becoming more and more aware of it now that you're in your 4th, 5th year?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to know. I mean, yes, every year we've had an increase in ticket sales, and that's really kind of the barometer by which everything is measured. The fact that we've been paying the bills since the day we've opened entirely on ticket sales because that's great. We're not a not-for-profit. We don't have grants. We don't have donors. We do have members who buy subscriptions. They're basically buying discounts to tickets, and we do so that helps us a little bit with overhead, and we sell concessions and stuff like that. But most of what we do is really from the ticket sales. When you go to a large not-for-profit theater, they often come out and say, your ticket sales only account for 10% of our expenses. Kind of thing. That's not the case in Hatbox. We've given away almost $200,000 to the production companies so far who have used the space. And we've had some really great experiences.
Yeah, I know.
The community at large has embraced us. In Concord's an interesting location because it's essentially 3 cities. There's the municipal part of Concord where the base of state government is downtown Concord, where the State House is. There's Pennacook, which is the village north of Concord, and then you have the Heights, which is where Hatbox is. It's across the river. And getting some people across the river to the theater can be challenging. But in general, the community has been great as far as ticket goers. When somebody comes to see a show at Hatbox, they come back and see 8 more. On an average, that's what happens.
That's an incredible number.
Yeah. It's remarkable that people are coming out for live experiences that often. Part of it is we try to keep it very affordable. The highest ticket price right now is $17. So, I mean, if you want to come a number of times, you can. It's not much more expensive than a dinner out or even the movies. It's probably cheaper than the movies if you consider concessions in it right now. But the artistic community has been even more embracing. I mean, this pitch, we had the actor-singers from Nashua pitched something.
They did?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that people from Nashua would want to come to Concord to produce a show is remarkable. We've had people produce shows from the Seacoast. We've had people produce shows from up near your neck of the woods, Gilmanton, Guilford, up in that neck of the woods. We've had people from western New Hampshire, out near Keene, who have come and done shows at the Hatbox. So it's a pretty special space. I am admittedly biased because I think it's a nice venue to work in, but it's different than a lot of performance arts venues that your listeners may have gone to that are more proscenium type of base where you're
I love it. I love the
picture
Hatbox.
Frame. I like to be surrounded by people.
So intimate. I love it.
In fact, our last one, we had 43 in-person pitches and one that got pitched outside of that, but we were done with about an hour and a half. Everybody was very efficient with their pitches. They provide us with a packet of information and copies of their scripts and things of that nature, supportive material that we dig through later. But the purpose of the pitch night is to kind of give us a taste of who you are and what you want to do. It kind of reveals a certain amount of the passion that you have for the project.
Yeah.
It reveals about your preparation skills, and we don't choose based on your pitch. The pitch is a way to just give one more piece of the puzzle that helps us evaluate whether you're ready to be part of our season. And it's deliberately a competitive process because I think that it's important for artists to know what others are doing in the community and also what level of capability that they do it at. And my hope is, and you've been a really great supporter, you've come and seen a lot of shows at the Hatbox, and for that we thank you. But I wish more people would come and see see more of the other productions, not just their own, because I think they would be astonished at the amount of professionalism that is displayed in what is traditionally called community theater. I think that they would be also astonished by the aspirations, that people really want to do really great work.
Yeah, I agree.
And the Hatbox gives them a place that they can do it without breaking the bank. And it really comes down to that relationship between artist and audience, which is what I do in magic, and it's what we do in theater. You know, any live performance. And the closer you can be, well, you're only 4 seats away. So you get to see every wrinkle on everybody's face. You get to see and experience every micro expression.
Absolutely.
You don't have to project in the old acting manner when you're on stage. You don't have to reach your grandmother in the back, which affects the people you're spitting on in the front. It's not like that. You can really exist in the Hatbox. You don't have to act. You can exist. You can inhabit the characters. And the most successful productions have embraced that. We had one group who started to load in a show, and they brought in microphones with them. And I said, what are these? We're going to add mics to all of our singers. I'm like, no, you're not. You have a choice.
That's crazy.
You can put them back in the car now and have that only to be the only gear that leaves the building right now, or you can take the rest of your gear and take it back outside and not put the show on, because it's unnecessary. When it comes to musicals, and we've had a number of musicals in the space, one of the things that most audiences don't get to see when it comes to musicals now, or get to experience, is the sound of the human voice unamplified. There's so much warmth and rich nuance that comes from listening to someone sing in air as opposed to through speaker. And in the Hatbox, we have a really nice acoustical setting, so it works very well from that perspective. And I think audiences are startled and delighted by the fact that there's not this wall of sound that's coming at them. They experience things from different points. You know, when you go and see a large musical, oftentimes when you're sitting in the 20th row and looking at the stage, the sound doesn't come from where the sound originates.
That's right.
It's just a wall of sound that fills your ears. It's almost like a soundtrack experience with a mime working on stage, and that people are getting used to that.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessary. You and I, we shared the stage. We did Jesus Christ Superstar back in the early 1990s, and I believe we were mic'd for that, although it's been such a long time.
Trying to think myself.
But they didn't overfill the sound in the space, and we worked in the City Auditorium. And the nice thing is that a lot of the performance arts venues from 100 years ago weren't made for amplified sound, so you could actually go in and speak or sing and be heard in the back. But it took a certain amount of, you had to become accustomed to it. Just like when you go and watch Shakespeare, usually it takes me 6 or 8 minutes to get my ear.
Right.
You know, once my ear's on, then I can understand stuff, but it takes a little bit for me to get used to the patterns and the rhythm and the inflection. And the same is true when you're in any performance space. And when I travel as a performer, and that's one of the best things for me to do when I arrive at any space, is I walk into it and I try to get a sense of the room, how it sounds, how it reflects, how I'm going to be viewed. And, you know, most of the places I play are non-traditional theater spaces, so you get what you get. So I've taken all of those thousands of performance venues that I've been in and tried to take the best lessons. And when we designed Hatbox as a space, I tried to create the best experience for performers that I would want as a performer, and also that for audiences in terms of the intimacy. Yeah, you can focus your effort, if you want to think of it from that perspective, on communicating the reality of the scene, and you can take that energy and internalize it and really listen to what's happening and be responsive. Just exist on stage and be there. And just existing is probably an oversimplification of it, because you're not just simply there. You're not a rock on stage, but you are receptive and you're responsive to everything that's happening. And it's the little micro expressions just from listening and responding are things that really draw people in. And we have a number of people who come back and see the same show several times and like to sit in different vantage points in the theater. To. You know, because then they can really get a different perspective on this, and they get to really enjoy different actors' work as well. And we have some really, really great actors who choose to perform.
The state is so full of them now, and it's great that they're coming down here. All right, my friend, I am so grateful you came by. I really am.
Thank you so
I've been looking forward to this so much. It's just rich. Anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring up?
This was a lot. This was
I know.
a big episode. I want to thank you, though, for doing this type of thing, because I think that oftentimes the only opportunity for audiences to get to know the actor or the performer or the producer is that 2 minutes after the show where they go, good job, really like that. And they don't get a chance to kind of dig into, what goes into it. And so I think I'm really excited about this project and what you're doing and the people that you're going to be talking with, because I think it really does a service to the community, both for audiences and artists, of exposing people to work that they don't know.
Yeah,
happens.
thank you. Thank you. That's my goal. All right, buddy.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check back for my future episodes. I'll be speaking to John Campanello, Jim Regato, Michael Curtis, Catherine Martinez, Katie Collins, Matt Cahoon, and many, many more.